Okay, good evening, everyone. So this week is like the turn for the bad guys. We're going to talk about Amalek this week because, of course, this Shabbat we read Parshat Zachor, the obligation to remember what Amalek did to us throughout history, and so we're going to see a number of explanations for what is going on, who is Amalek, and what they represent. So we'll see a number of totally different ideas about the concept of Amalek. Um, but the one point I just want to make is that we read the Torah all the time, and it's of course a wonderful thing. We don't go 3 days without the community having Torah readings. We have Monday, Thursday, and then Shabbat. Um, but all of that is rabbinic. The rabbi said you have to do it. The one Torah reading every year, which is from the Torah itself, is Parshat Amalek. So those three psukim that we read at the end of chapter 25 of Devarim, the end of Parshat Kitetse, those three verses, it is a mitzvah from the Torah to read those verses. So I just want to say two customs that have developed about the reading of those things. The first is it's very common that even though most of us, vast majority of us, sit for Torah reading, that the custom is to stand for those three verses this coming Shabbat. And the other famous custom is many times in the Torah, there are arguments over how to pronounce a certain word. And we just, the rabbis decide this is the best reading of the word, so just read it one time. But this week, there is an argument about in the last verse, the third and last verse, it says in the verse, Timcha et zecher Amalek, which literally means erase the memory of Amalek. However, there are authorities that say you should read it Timcha et zecher, not memory of Amalek, but mention, same three Hebrew letters, but you're changing the dots, the vocalizations. So this is the only time during the year when we read the word both ways. Because again, since it's from the Torah, then most shuls today read the verse first saying zecher, the memory, and then repeat the verse pronouncing it zecher, mentioning of. And again, because these three verses, this one time a year, is a mitzvah d'oraita to remember what Amalek did to us, we repeat the verse. So it's a little bit more intense, this reading. And a lot of people that are less concerned about making it to shul, do go out of their way to make sure they're in shul for the reading of Amalek. And that final verse that I was just mentioning is the verse I put at the top of the page. And so the verse goes, V'haya, b'haniach Hashem Elokecha, l'cha mikol oivecha. And it will be when God, now the translation I have here is from the JPS, Jewish Publication Site, says grants you. Okay, when God grants you or benefits you with rest from all of your enemies that surround you in the Aretz, in the land, in Eretz Yisrael, Asher Hashem Elokecha notein lecha, which God has given to you as a nachala, as a hereditary portion, l'rishta, to inherit it. When that happens, when all of the wars have stopped in Israel and you can catch your breath, there are two things you're supposed to do. The first one is build a temple, the Beit HaMikdash. Of course, initially it was the Mishkan, the semi-permanent temple in Shiloh. And then later, the real real Beit HaMikdash built by Shlomo Melech in Yerushalayim. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to track down Amalek and get rid of all of them. And then it says, Timche et Zecher Amalek. Amalek, erase the memory or the mention of Amalek, mitachat hashamayim, from beneath the heavens, lo tishcha, don't forget, which is funny. Blot out the memory and then don't forget. When if I blot out memory, didn't I forget it? I mean, how can you have it both ways? So we're going to see how the rabbis sort of finagle what seems like a bit of a conundrum. How can you can't have it, you can't not remember and then remember, Make sure you leave your keys home and then you go outside. You say, what can I do? I forgot my keys, but I had to. You can't do it both ways, right? So we'll see. It'll take us a couple of minutes till we get to that problem. The first problem is, what is this mitzvah? And so I'm going to start with the Rabbeinu Bechaye. And Rabbeinu Bechaye has an interesting approach, which will help us with the other problem. It will be when the Lord your God grants you rest, etc. The Torah speaks about after Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, has been conquered. You are then to blot out the memory of Amalek. We have to understand this in terms in which Shmuel issued the directive to Shaul. What does it mean to wipe out Amalek? I don't know what that means. So we don't find out what it means to wipe out Amalek until we get to the book of Shmuel. And Shmuel gives to Shaul, the first king of Israel, instructions about how to destroy Amalek. So we have a mitzvah in the Torah right here at the end of Parshat Ki Teitzei, but we don't understand what the mitzvah entails until we read in the prophets what Shmuel told to Shaul. And so this is what he tells him. We read there in the book of Shmuel, kill all that belongs to him, spare no one, but kill alike men and women, infant and suckling. Don't allow any of them to survive. But not only that, you kill the oxen and the sheep, the camels and the asses, donkeys. What's going on? Why is it so important to make sure that there are no survivors? The reason the prophet specified all this was so that no one would ever be able to point to an animal or a person and say, this is what's left. This animal used to belong to the Amalekites. So in other words, according to Rabbeinu Bechaye, you read the verse, Timche et Zecher, erase the mention of them. And that now makes sense. Don't forget to erase everything about mentioning them. And it's no longer a contradiction, right? The reason the prophet specified all this so no one ever be able to point to him and say, this was one of the animals of Amalek. If he were to utter the name of Amalek as something still extant in the world, means that the commandment to blot out his memory would not have been fulfilled. To blot out his mention would not have been fulfilled. We can remember, according to this interpretation, we can remember it, but we can't mention it. We shouldn't be able to have reminders of Amalek all around us as we live our lives. That's why we had to get rid of absolutely everything that had to do with Amalek. So that sort of answers at least part of the problem. Rabbi Lichtenstein, Rav Moshe Lichtenstein, one of the sons of Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, and it's a funny thing tonight. Often on the page I have Rebbeim and teachers from Yeshivat Har Etzion, and tonight I'm going to have 3 on the page. I think that's a record for any organization that I had 3 from one source, sort of. But Rav Moshe Lichtenstein, in talking about this week's parsha, says the holiday of Purim is about defeating Amalek. So we're going to read about Amalek this week, but really this is an introduction to the holiday of Purim. And that's why that I think this is what Rabbi Lichtenstein means, and it's true. That's why we make sure that Pashat Zachor is always read the Shabbat before Purim, to make sure that we understand what Purim is about. Purim is about the destruction of Amalek / Haman. So that's what we have to remember. But what is the Amalekite philosophy? What is it that we're destroying? And is it, from the previous interpretation of Rabbeinu Bachai, it sounds like it's a gene pool. We have to destroy the DNA, right? But according to Rabbi Lichtenstein, it's not. He says it's a philosophy, it's an ideology, it's a way of life which must be destroyed. And what is that? What does it mean to defeat it? This is echoed by Haman's declaration. It says Haman is going to teach us about what it means to wipe out Amalek. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them. He meant the Jews. In other words, Amalek teaches us what it means to get rid of a people. In other words, they invented genocide. And it's because of that we have to get rid of them. And I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's treasury. That's the Amalekite methodology. To engage in battle, not for the sake of ideology, an idea, a philosophy, a way of life, no, but merely to satisfy the dark side of the human spirit, the desire to harm others. He wasn't going to gain anything. When Jews go to war, today we go to war to defend ourselves. In the biblical days, we sometimes went to war to expand the boundaries of the country because we needed more land or we needed more food. So in other words, there was always a reason. Amalek doesn't need a reason. He goes to war just because he's decided he doesn't like a certain people. I just want to wipe them out. Even though I don't benefit, I'll pay you for the right to kill the Jews. He's getting absolutely no benefit. It's just the dark side of the human. Now, I don't know if Rabbi Lichtenstein thought about this, but when he writes the dark side, I immediately think about Star Wars. But the dark side. So, but it is the dark side of the human psyche, the human spirit, the human soul. But simply to express the cruelty lurking in the darkest crevices of the soul. Beautiful expression. Rabbi Lichtenstein, like his father, writes beautifully. This tendency exists deep within human nature. Everybody has this mean streak in them. It exists. Baruch Hashem, for most of us, it's just a little bit. It's not a lot. It's not dominant, but it's there. I remember when I was a kid, I used to sometimes with my father, Oliver Shalom, watch wrestling on TV. I never really liked it, but I was a kid. What did I know? My father was watching it, so I watched it too. And it's like you listen to the crowd. And they literally just want blood. I mean, it's like it's a toned down version of gladiators. Everybody has deep inside them this dark nature that enjoys or gets something from it. I'm not sure exactly what it is. This tendency exists deep within human nature, a primal survival mechanism maintaining its animalistic character. And so Rabbi Lichtenstein's explaining it's necessary for us to have this character trait of periodically being able to be violent. It helped put food on the table in the pre-modern world, and today it allows us to have armies to protect us. Baruch Hashem, we're safe here in Eretz Yisrael, relatively, because we have wonderful soldiers protecting us. So it's humans have this side to them, but we Jews, it's filed back in our psyche. With Amalek, it's the whole nature of the psyche. It's just, front and center out to get us. So we need this ability to be violent, to fight. An internal system of laws and societal sanctions produce social norms and the distinctive and the disincentive to act this way. But we in society, I'm not talking about an enemy on the other side of the border, in our own society, that same violent streak exists. So we make laws to disincentivize that behavior. Oh, if you commit assault and battery, you go to jail. You pay a fine. We stop you from doing those things, because in society we want to disincentivize these parts, these dark parts of the human psyche. But they're there because we needed them to survive in the wilds of our ancestors, and even now to be able to have soldiers that, when necessary, to protect our way of life. But that's in the background. In the foreground is kindness and compassion and empathy. But with Amalek, it's the opposite. What you see right away is the violence. Moreover, each person has an inner sense of binding ethics. Amalek does not. Amalek, instead of directing these primal urges towards some beneficial end, like protecting the family, they let them run wild. They allow these primal violent tendencies to just dominate their lives. Therefore, Purim is not merely an occasion for feasting towards some beneficial end. Feasting and rejoicing, recalling our victory. It requires that we think of where we came from, what evil can exist within us, and how we withstood that destructive impulse and conquered it. Our joy is not just at being saved from death, but at the defeat of the evil force, that survival instinct planted within us by God. In other words, when you see films of the liberation of the camps, on Yom HaShoah or whatever, it's like there was a double joy. One is that small percentage survived, and we're happy, and we hugged them, embraced them, and brought many of them to Eretz Yisrael. But we also rejoiced over the fact that the demon of Haman/Hitler was destroyed. In other words, Purim is a celebration, a more physical celebration of the fact that we defeated the ideology of Haman, and that we now can live in societies that are, more pleasant, more humane. So that's the second interpretation. Okay. First one was we never want to mention them. That's why I have to kill the sheep. The second one is we have to feel good that we got rid of this evil influence in society and in the world. It's a force for evil. Okay. Rav Amital, Rabbi Yehuda Amital, who died just over 10 years ago, was also Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshivat Har Etzion, and he wrote about this topic, and he said, in reading Shabbat Zachor, which is, again, those 3 verses in chapter 25 of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, the Torah used the word korcha. So the first verse is Zachor at the Asher Baterach B'Tzeitcha Mitzrayim, Asher korcha baderech. Now, we don't know what it means, korcha. It can mean a number of things. It can mean to happen upon them, but we're going to see it can also mean that he made them cold. Kor is cold. But here, let's see how Rav Amital deals with it. The Maharal connects this word to mikra, chance. They chanced upon us in the desert, and explains that Amalek represents the ideology that everything in the world takes place by chance, that there is no plan, Everything is a happenstance. Everything is just happens. There's no rhyme, no reason, no purpose. There is no sense of order to the world. Whatever you suggest or believe, the opposite is also possible and feasible. Now, I can't convince anybody that my philosophy is right because he or she can have just as strong arguments in the opposite side. That's what Amalek says. Whatever you want to believe, that fine. But I can believe this, and you can't convince me otherwise. There are no absolutes. There are no standards. The Torah's decree that all Amalekites need to be destroyed applies only to those Amalekites who adhere to this ideology. This ideology. Only if they continue to believe that the world has no purpose, no rhyme, no reason. If, though, they accept the 7 Noahide laws, then you can't kill them. So, in other words, it's not really genocide. We're killing an idea. We're not killing people because the people could opt out of it. That's the opinion of Rav Amital. We're going to see it on the back page, a similar idea. Not everyone agrees. The Rambam rules that battle is only waged against Amalekites who have not accepted the 7 Noahide laws. If an Amalekite rids himself of that ideology, he is no longer deserving of death and can be accepted into the community of humanity. Nevertheless, the ideology of Amalek persists. Every generation has some version of an Amalekite philosophy. What do we call it today? According to Rav Amital, today it is represented by postmodernism. Now, I'm not even sure what postmodernism is, but you hear the expression. Oh, that's a postmodern way of looking at it. Postmodernism, every generation has an idea that sort of believes in anarchy or nihilism. And so he claims that postmodern, I'm not sure that it's that universal in what's considered postmodernism, but the idea is that there are no accepted norms. You can do anything you want and excuse it with your own ideas. This ideology maintains that there are no objective standards. Everything is acceptable. We sometimes encounter these claims today with regards to religious pluralism. Oh, right. I can keep kosher my own way. I can have my own Shabbat. I can, in other words, there are no objective norms. While we are open to different approaches, we need to recognize that not everything is acceptable. I mean, you can daven this way and you can daven that way. Nusach Ashkenaz, Nusach Sfarad, you can follow your customs, and all that is wonderful. But there's got to be some unifying ideas at some point, and that are accepted to everyone. Some things are out of bounds. Some things are invalid. We believe there is meaning in the world, and therefore oppose the ideology of Amalek, even when it dresses itself in religious garb. For example, the claim that everything in the world is the way it is simply because God randomly decided it should be that way. We don't believe that. We believe that God created things in a way that everything makes sense, and that's often we see the beauty, the logic, the sense of the universe. Not always, but many times we do. And that's what's wonderful. We don't believe that everything is meaningless. We believe everything has meaning. And we fight these ideas that want to just make everything nihilistic, chaotic. This kind of approach denies the world reason and meaningfulness. And while it presents itself as religious, it is actually the opposite. Religion demands meaning in life. Yet the fact that the world is meaningful does not mean that one can fully understand it rationally. I mean, I can't explain. I know that it's right to live this way, and I know in my heart that this is one. That doesn't mean I can't always come up with a philosophic explanation. Today, people recognize that the mystery of the world cannot be solved fully through rational means. Neither faith nor apostasy can be proven in a laboratory. I can't go to a lab and prove the existence of God. So each remains a belief based on equivocal evidence. The person who lacks faith has also reached a conclusion based on objective doubt. Nevertheless, God has planted within us a feeling of faith that does not demand proof. The religious personality is a natural phenomenon in the world. We see this. There are, there are in the world many religions, but almost everybody does belong to either a religion or an ideology that gives meaning to life. We see here that what characterizes Amalek throughout the generations is the concept of mikra, attributing everything to randomness and coincidence. Nothing has meaning. Nothing that happens is truly meaningful. While Am Yisrael, us, is permanently on the way. Now, I like the way he talks about on the way. We believe there's a path to follow. What's so interesting is in yeshivas, they talk about being either, he's in the derech, or we say he's OTD, he's off the derech, right? And it's just interesting that usually it's more right-wing yeshivas that talk about this idea of being either on or off the derech. But Rav Amital brought it in. A concept denoting continuity. I'm on the road, and the road starts someplace and will ultimately end someplace. My life has purpose and meaning. For me, the path that I'm carrying on what I got from my ancestors and giving it to my descendants, and I feel that this is the way that the world has meaning. Amalek maintained an ideology of non-ideology. I like that phrase. An ideology of non-ideology. Everything is permissible. You can believe anything you want. There is no journey, no direction. Everything that happens, coincidental. There is no absolute value that must be held dear. Am Yisrael, in contrast, have a direction and an objective. They have clear values. We have clear values. The festival associated with the wiping out of Purim, of Amalek, is known as Purim, named after the poor, the lot that was cast by Haman. This would seem to be a peculiar choice of name. Why emphasize this issue of casting lots? Because the lot, the lottery, the pulling out of the astrakhan from the pot symbolizes the Amalekite ideology, according to which everything is based on chance, on luck, on coincidence. There is no absolute value. There are no absolute values. There is no objective good. We can't live with that because we definitely believe that there are objective goods, kindness, empathy, all of this. We believe that they are objectively good, and that's what we're supposed to do to make the world a better place. Amalek says, no, anything you want to think of, that works fine. Judaism is therefore completely opposed to this view. On the individual level, Hasidism teaches that every person contains a small degree of Amalekism, and each person must work on himself in order to wipe it out. I have these nihilistic, anarchic tendencies within me, and I have to fight them tooth and nail all the time because I have to convince myself that there is a purpose, there is a meaning, and we have to continually strive and work on ourselves to make sure that we not only believe it, but we live a life that is meaningful, that does carry on positive ideology. I just want to make one editorial comment here before we go to the next idea. In Hasidus, there is a tendency to take a lot of ideas like Amalek and make them symbolic, because Remember, Hasidism wants you to think that the perfect world is the Rebbe's court somewhere in Poland or in Lithuania or in Hungary, right? And so they don't want to say that, oh, someday we'll move to Eretz Israel and fulfill this mitzvah. They don't want to say that because they want to say that the life in the court of the Rebbe is perfect. So in Hasidic thought, a lot of things having to do with the Beit HaMikdash, Eretz Yisrael, Amalek, a lot of these ideas are symbolized in the life that they lead in the court of their Rebbe, which is why a lot of the rabbinic courts in the Hasidic movement had the word Yerushalayim or Zion in it, because where the Rebbe is, that's Jerusalem to the Hasidic movement. That's why, I mean, I know this, that's why someone living in Yerushalayim can say to themselves, oh, I'm going to go to Uman for Rosh Hashanah. How can you leave Yerushalayim for Rosh Hashanah? Well, because the Rebbe is really the source and the core and the center of our spiritual being. So it works in Hasidism, but again, they took a lot of biblical ideas that talk about the reality of Eretz Yisrael and the temple and all of those things, and they make them all symbolic. And the Rebbe is the symbol of them all. Okay, so that was that footnote at the end. Next, the Radbaz. Now, the Radbaz, who is a commentary on the Rambam, and he lived in the 15th century, and he brings up an amazingly important idea in terms of our personal responsibility in this mitzvah. And he makes a couple of really important ideas. Rabbi Yoshua, this is a Gemara. It's in two different places in the Gemara, and it says, Sennacherib, who was the Assyrian king. He's the guy that destroyed the 10 northern tribes, tried to come to Yerushalayim, and he didn't come himself. He sent his general Sambalat, and they were died in a plague, and Yerushalayim in the southern kingdom of Judea was saved. But we believe, I don't know if this is what I'm going to say now. I don't know, I majored in history in college, but what I'm going to say, I don't know if this is historically true. We believe that Sennacherib mixed up all of the peoples, that he didn't only exile the 10 northern tribes. Now, as he would go to Syria and move the Syrians out, go to Lebanon, move the Lebanese out, go to Turkey, move the Turks out. He was moving populations all over the place so that none of them would feed on their nationalism, and that he mixed all of the DNA of humanity so that there no longer was, except for the places he didn't conquer, like Judea, there no longer was the ancient biblical gene pools. Sennacherib has intermingled all the nations. So today, I don't know who's an Assyrian or a Babylonian or a Persian or an Egyptian. I don't know. It all got mixed up by Sennacherib, who did all of these population transfers. But note something strange. In relation to the destruction of Amalek, remember, there's a comment on the Rambam, Maimonides does not add, and their memory has already been erased. As he says, the mitzvah still exists today. So the Radbaz has to understand, how can the Rambam disagree with the Gemara? How we have to figure out what the mitzvah is today, now that the gene pool, the DNA of Amalek no longer exists. Tradition teaches, remember with your mouth, do not forget in your heart, for it is prohibited to forget his enmity and hatred. For Maimonides appears that Amalek still exists, but it's not a genetic group. One wonders why Maimonides did not use Rabbi Yoshua with relation to Amalek and says we can't do the mitzvah anymore because they no longer exist. The answer is very simple. The Bible testifies that Amalek still exists. How do I know that Amalek still exists? Because the first time we encounter Amalek, which is at the end of Parshat B'Shalach, just between the crossing the Red Sea and getting to Mount Sinai, the pasuk says, Um, it means hand upon the throne of the Lord. The Lord will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages. Midor, door. So, in other words, the Torah says that the fight is eternal. So, Amalek has to still exist. How can that be? Accordingly, it is impossible for Amalek to be blotted out until Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, we will get rid of them. But where is Amalek today? But where is Amalek? I heard the answer from my father. The Radbaz quotes his father. Every nation that conspires to destroy the Jewish people is considered by the halacha to be Amalek. This idea became very popular earlier in the mid 20th century, especially after World War II, where we associated Hitler, Yamach Shemo, with Haman and Amalek. So we say anybody who makes it their goal, their prime directive to destroy Jews, that person we define as Amalek. Amalek means those people who want to destroy the Jews. This is very different than Rabbi Amital, who said Amalek are people that don't believe in objective truth. He also agreed it's an idolatry, but not an ideology, but he had a different idea of what it is. My father added that we were commanded to perform two mitzvot. A, the first mitzvah is for every individual. It is incumbent on everyone to slay any individual member of Amalek that he encounters. So in other words, if before Sancheiriv, somebody came over and said, oh, I'm an Amalekite, it'd be a mitzvah if we could get away with it, to take out a knife and kill him. The second mitzvah is for the community to engage in communal military preparedness for war against Amalek. We're always, as a community, preparing for our defense against whoever wants to destroy us. In other words, Hezbollah is Amalek because their goal is to wipe us out. Hamas is Amalek, okay? And so we have to, as a nation, prepare ourselves and be ready and indeed fight them. With relation to any other nation that stands ready to destroy us, we are commanded to wage war against it, even while it prepares for war against us. And our war against it is a war of mitzvah, milchemet mitzvah, an obligatory war to fight. In accordance with the command of the Torah, that the Lord will wage war with Amalek from generation to generation. However, the destruction of individuals refers only to the biological descendants of Amalek. The original individual mitzvah of any Jew killing an Amalekite that he encounters, that mitzvah doesn't exist anymore because there is no gene pool. There's no recognizable DNA that says he's Amalek. So that individual mitzvah doesn't exist. All that exists today is the big picture mitzvah of our nation preparing to fight for our enemies. The status of Amalek exists even now after the nations were intermingled by Sancheiriv. And perhaps this is the basis for Maimonides' view that a defensive war by Jews against an enemy who comes to wage war against us is a war of mitzvah. So in other words, anybody that attacks Jews, organized armies, and we have to fight back, that's a national communal obligation that is fulfilling the mitzvah of destroying Amalek. So the Medina has a mitzvah to destroy Amalek. I personally don't have that mitzvah. So it's interesting. The Radbaz is really, I don't know what the Haredim say about that. I mean, because the Radbaz is saying we have to have an army. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa that we have to have an army so that we can protect ourselves from these bad guys who want to destroy us. Because by definition, the bad guys who want to destroy us are Amalek. It's a mitzvah from the Torah. We have to get rid of them. Okay, we're starting to run out of time a little bit. We have two more opinions left. Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch has just a beautiful idea The truth is, I probably should have put Rabbi Hirsch last, but I put Rav Hutner last. You'll see why in a minute. But I think the most beautiful of the pieces we're going to take a look at tonight is Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who wrote this in the middle of the 1800s. The obligation to use just weights and measures completes the ideal picture of the Jews as a people that distances itself from any exploitation of one person over another. When we have the mitzvah of destroying Amalek, just before it, it has the mitzvah of don't possess any false weights and measures. Because all of the mitzvot given in the Torah up until that point, chapter 25 of Devarim, the end of Parshat Ki Tetzei, is about making a just society. And the final rule in the just society is to have fair weights and measures. And society should make sure that every shopkeeper, every store has their scales. And I don't see it here, but in America, when you weigh things on a scale in a store or in a supermarket, they were inspected. You see a little stamp on it saying when somebody came to inspect it, because you have to have fair weights and measures, and that's a mitzvah from the Torah. So we just had that rule. Then it says kill Amalek. What's going on? Members of this people will not exploit the trust of one person in another, without which people cannot live together in community. So the Torah is building a perfect society where everyone is kind and just and fair. They have faith that Hashem is their God only if they reject any injustice towards God's creatures. I can only worship Hashem by being nice to other humans. If I'm not nice to other people, that's not Jewish. That's not Judaism. From this flows justice and honesty. Our national nature is characterized by empathy, consideration, generosity, and loving kindness. Justice and loving kindness are woven into us. For this reason, the Torah reminds us that the difference between Israel and Amalek is never to be forgotten. In other words, we are fighting Amalek because we represent a fair, equitable society. And Amalek represents taking advantage of people, cheating, stealing, that they want society to be corrupt. The land that your God gave you was already promised to your ancestors and is given to you only so that you can bequeath it to your children. You inherit it by your loyalty to the covenant, and only if you bequeath this loyalty to your children will you bequeath them the land. In other words, what gives us the right or gives us the expectation that our kids will continue to grow Eretz Yisrael, that expectation is based upon the fact that we are handing them a just society. Blot out the memory of Amalek, not Amalek, but the memory and fame of Amalek. This endangers the moral future of humanity. The moral future of humanity demands that the ideology of Amalek be destroyed. Don't forget. Don't forget a thing, if the day will come when you will want to be like Amalek. Everybody has this tendency in their deep, dark side, but we have to fight it and exploit your advantage to harm others. Once I become Amalek, I'm going to lie and cheat and steal. I'm going to take advantage of everybody else. Don't forget this when you want to rid yourself of your mission to humanity. Don't envy the laurels of those who happily sacrifice the happiness of others. My goal is to make everybody happy. I shouldn't sacrifice their happiness so that I can somehow be happier. Stand tall and preserve your humanity and value justice. Rav Hirsch, he just has a beautiful way of expressing himself. They are the future. Humaneness will prevail over violence. You were sent to bring this future closer through your example. This victory, and this future. And that's just a beautiful idea. Destroying Amalek means establishing a fair, righteous society. And that's what it's about. And we only have the right to hand over things to the next generation if we live this fair, valued existence or value based existence. So the last person I'm going to take a look at tonight is Rav Hutner. Rav Hutner, the Pachad Yitzchak, um, was 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 born in Europe, in Lithuania. He actually came to Eretz Yisrael as a young man, and was supposed to be in Hebron in 1929 when the massacre took place, when the Slobodka Yeshiva was wiped out. 66 students were murdered by Arabs in the city of Hebron, and he was supposed to be there. And he got waylaid in Yerushalayim, Baruch Hashem, so he survived. He lived in Yerushalayim for a few years, was a Talmud of Rav Kook. And then around the time that Rav Kook died in 1935, he came to America and eventually became the Rosh Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin on Coney Island Avenue in Brooklyn. And he was there, until he retired in the early 70s. And he spent the last decade of his life, the 70s, 1970s, here in Yerushalayim. And he was an interesting thinker. He was a real philosopher of Jewish concepts. So he says right away, Amalek is a metaphor. We're not talking about flesh and blood people. We're not talking about a gene pool. It's a metaphor. What's it a metaphor for? For an existential spiritual threat. The threat of Amalek, more than it's a threat on our flesh and blood, it's mostly a threat on our spirit. Amalek is not an ancient nation, but an enduring effort to widen the gap between generations. What does Amalek want? Amalek wants children to rebel against parents. It wants us to not remain in touch with our roots. Picking up on the text's emphasis on the intergenerational nature of the battle. That brings us back to the pasuk that I read before, which is Vayomer ki yad al keska. The hand of Amalek is against the throne of God. Milchama la Hashem. There's a war of God. Ba Amalek, with Amalek, midor door, from generation to generation. Because what Amalek wants to do is get the children to rebel against the parents. Picking up on the text's emphasis on the intergenerational nature of this battle, God will be at war with Amalek from generation to generation. The obligation to blot out the memory of Amalek means engaging in the fight against the distancing of generations from one another. This battle is won by binding parents to children, and likewise teachers to students. This obligation means, above all, respecting one's student as oneself. And it's true about parents and children. The previous generation has to cherish the next generation. The parents, the rebbes, the guides, the leaders of this door have to make sure that they hand this over to the next generation. And the next generation has to see it as their obligation to just continue this chain of tradition. That's that famous pasuk, of course, we say 3 times every day in Ashrei. Dor ledor yishabach masecha. From generation to generation, we praise Hashem. How do I know how to daven? Because I saw the previous generation daven. How do I know how to be a good Jew? Because I saw my ancestors and I saw my rabbis and my teachers, and they taught me what it means. That's what it's all about. Door lidor, generation to generation. And that's where Amalek tries to drive a wedge in the nation, tries to get the younger generation to reject the previous generations. And that's a real problem. And it happens even in religious communities and religious families, that the children just have decided, I have to blaze my own trail. Yes, you can blaze your own trail, but you should do it following the traditions of your family, and make sure that these age-old traditions you develop so that you can give them over to the next generation. When I first heard Rabbi Soloveitchik say the importance of that pasuk in Ashrei, Dor L'Dor Yeshabach Masecha, is I only know how to daven because I saw my predecessors, parents, teachers, rabbis, daven. They taught me how. That's a wonderful idea, but it's also a spooky idea, because it means I have to model that behavior for the next generation too. How do I defeat Amalek? According to Rav Hutner, I don't have to pick up a gun. What do I have to do? I have to be a role model for my children and my students. I have to be their guide to what a true Jewish traditional lifestyle should look like. And that's scary. It's very nice to say, I want to do what my Bubby and Zadie did. That's easy. That's beautiful. But unfortunately for me, I've now become the Zadie to another generation. And I have that obligation to make sure that I model a type of Jewish lifestyle that's going to inspire them to make sure that we beat Amalek and keep the chain of generational tradition going. And that's ultimately the story of Purim. Oh, Gail. Thank you, Gail. You only say that because I'm so much older than you. Okay, thank you all for coming this evening. Next week is going to be much nicer, Purim, happier. But the idea, the threat of Amalek is something that we have to be with us all the time. And it was the second page that really are the ones we have to think about. The national obligation to protect ourselves from outside threats, and then the idea of Rav Hutner and sort of Rav Hirsch, how important it is that we fight Amalek first and foremost in our own families. And both of these ideas are inspiring and very important to what's going on in our modern world.
Absolutely.
Okay. Good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Have a good week.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.